I'm Dan Fagin. I'm the director of the Science, Health, and Environmental Reporting Program here at NYU. Welcome. I will not do my usual long-winded introduction, except just to say I see people who I don't know, and if I don't know you, you're extra welcome. The people I do know are welcome also. Thank you for coming. And it's a real pleasure to have Amy Dockser Marcus and Sarah Slobin here, because the project they collaborated on is really amazing. If you haven't had a chance to see it, you'll get a little taste of it tonight, and it is absolutely worth paying attention to, because it is the kind of thing that we will all be doing. Probably not as well as they did it, but we'll be aspiring to do what they did. And that is a kind of a seamless integration of text and image, and do it in a way that really engages the reader literally, allowing the reader to fully interact with the content, which is very exciting. And we can learn a lot by sort of pulling apart a piece like this. So Amy and Sarah, thank you very much for coming. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lee Hotz, Distinguished Writer in Residence here at the Carter Institute and science writer at the Wall Street Journal, because tonight is an all Wall Street Journal production.
It is indeed, it is indeed. So thank you, Dan. And welcome to Inside Out. And at the outset, I want you all to understand that this evening's exercise is in the way of an interactive, immersive conversation, not a lecture. So I will encourage you, please, to interrupt when you feel moved to, help us digress in creative ways. And when you spirit does strike you, make sure that you get the microphone from Dan so that we can record your good questions as part of the evening's back and forth. So we are this spring returning to first principles here, the evolving elements of narrative, the construction kit of science journalism. We began last week with film. Those of you who were here with us, Randy Olson and his transformation from a scientist into a science storyteller. On April 1st, we'll look at science narrative as performance art with the founder of Story Collider, Ben Lilly. And then on May 8th, we'll be joined by easily the most irreverent, if not the most influential and prolific science blogger in the world, Ed Young, of Not Exactly Rocket Science, who will be joining us from England. Tonight, though, we immerse ourselves in a quite remarkable project published by the Wall Street Journal called Trials. It was an exemplar of the new wave of multimedia immersive narrative. What do I mean by immersive? Well, let me direct your attention for a moment to the opening image behind me, a kind of a classic, moody, nicely toned, slightly pathetic in the old-fashioned Greek sense, an image of a sleeping child. But if you look, you'll notice the child is breathing. It's this kind of subtle but telling use of visuals, of interactives, of video, of photographs, of animation that informs stories like this. And while we think of ourselves as science journalists often working in isolation, it's important with projects like this to remember that journalism is, after all, a team sport, sort of like global thermonuclear war. Right? It takes a lot of people sometimes to pull something off. And this multimedia storytelling experiment, 10 chapters, 17,000 words, took 27 people, by my count, 27 people to, in the end, produce. Amy, the reporter, Sarah, the interactive visual editor, or a producer, I suppose now, we would call you a producer. Amy comes to us today from Boston, where she's a Boston-based staff member of the New York Health and Science Bureau of the Wall Street Journal. Boston's her hometown, But in a way, she's also a native of the Wall Street Journal because off and on, she's worked there since 1988 or so.
Mostly on.
Mostly on, yes. Well, keep those paychecks coming. And she's a Pulitzer Prize winner 2005 for beat reporting for her work on cancer survivors, a series of 9 articles. Sarah Slobin, our visual producer, an NYU grad, I'm pleased to say, with a BFA in theater, though, I should tell you. Trained and worked 15 years at the New York Times, where she, among other things, ran the business graphics desk. She was graphics director for Fortune. She's worked with ProPublica, and since 2009 with the Wall Street Journal as a visual journalist. And one of the things we want to talk about tonight is that growing sense of what a reporter is visually, is textually, how that works. Sarah works with developers, editors, and reporters to create interactive stories like this, drawing on data, on photography, video, infographics. She's worked on several of these. She was part of the journal's What They Know series, which won the Loeb Award for Interactive Journalism in 2010. But I want to start with you, Amy, if I may. 27 people, very elaborate process, yet it started with just you. And it was a reporting process, 6 years. You did not launch with the idea of this in mind. What lit the fuse here?
I think in some ways it was originally something very personal, in that my mother was diagnosed with a rare type of cancer, metastatic gallbladder cancer. And you know, it came as a shock, as it usually does. She was an extremely healthy 62-year-old woman who you know, felt intense pain, was doubled over and rushed to the emergency room, and finds out that she has terminal cancer. You know, and so as a reporter, not just as her daughter, but as a reporter, I immediately went into this mode of trying to help her, doing research and calling contacts. I mean, I just finished a 9-part series on cancer. Who better than to find the cure or the right doctor or the right place? And what I slowly discovered was that with rare cancers and rare diseases, it's just very hard to find the right place. Everybody was kind, everybody did their best to help me, but there was nothing to do. And I started to get very interested in rare diseases in general, and why is it so challenging to develop drugs for them? Why is it such a problem? And why are so many people left essentially to die? It didn't seem fair. To have, you know, you have bad luck that you get a disease that nobody's interested in, and there's really no hope at all because there's nothing going on. So from this personal situation, I started to look more broadly at this problem, and
this problem of rare diseases.
Yes, and how to accelerate drug development, how to create different ways of doing drug development so that you could have therapies, and started the research that way, looking for innovative models of people doing things in a different way, you know, and just started collecting stories about that.
Okay, so there wasn't a particular, oh, you got a phone call or you came across a particular case. You know, for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to immerse yourselves in this immersive, it's really about the struggles of a series of families whose children have a particular disease, the name of which?
Niemann-Pick type C.
Which is almost always fatal, I think, by adolescence, is that right?
It is fatal.
It is fatal.
There's no cure.
Forget the almost, I'll edit that out. But there was no signal event here that sucked you into this. I mean, how particular did you come to hook yourself for 6 years to this particular set of families?
Right.
I mean, let's be real. There is, of course, a kind of a cliche to the save the life of my child, the family with the terrible story. It's a very classic medical narrative. It's a classic lobbying technique. So I'm just wondering how you got hooked to this particular effort.
So when I was interested in the topic, I started, as I would any reporting project where I don't exactly know where I'm going, other than I'm sure that I have a great idea and need to pursue it. So I started calling all my sources and saying, look, I'm really interested in people who are thinking outside the box, you know, about rare diseases. Can you give me some names of people that you've met who are doing something interesting? And I started calling all of them, and I would interview them. And the people that seemed kind of interesting, either that they were doing something particularly innovative, or even better, they knew how to tell a story really well about what they were doing, I started meeting them. You know, and I would spend more time with them, just looking for the right narrative and not sure yet who it was going to be.
But and I have to say, are you doing this as part of an assignment?
Well, I'm a health reporter.
Right.
So I sort of said, yeah. I mean, no one said go out and do it, but it's my job to find interesting stories. I thought it was an interesting theme. I just didn't know exactly where it would go. I didn't have, an editor didn't assign me, didn't say, hey, we really need a story on some innovative model for, you know, accelerating drug development. I just thought it was interesting. And of course, it wasn't the only thing I was doing. I was doing other stories at the same time, but I just kept going, you know, kept collecting stuff. And notebooks started to fill. And then at one point, I got introduced to one particular parent who said to me, you know, gave me his personal story, his personal journey, explained that he was doing something very innovative because unlike many of these other attempts, he said, we're not only out just for a drug, we want to change science. We think it's bigger than just our disease. We think rare...
This is a parent talking.
Yes, a parent. We think rare disease drug development needs transformation, and we really think the only way to do that is to partner with the scientists, equal partners, you know, citizen scientists and professional scientists. And I said, well, do you actually have some partners? And he said, yes. As a matter of fact, we do. And we're going to be meeting in a couple weeks, all of us, you know, to talk about it. Do you want to come? I said, sure, that sounds great. And so I went.
And you went with what idea? Oh, I'm going to write a story about this. I mean, I'm still with the 6 years process. I'm sorry, it's a very, very long time. And it's very, I think, important to our understanding of this, that a lot of what we're about to kind of immerse ourselves in this project, this is all stuff that's retroactive. I mean, you did not collect this stuff as you went with the idea that you were one day going to have to cough up hundreds of family photographs of these people,
right,
or telling scenes of you know, poignant despair with the mother hacking her hair off in the middle of the night. I mean, this is just stuff you're doing as a, if I may say, as a kind of interesting but peculiar hobby. Yeah?
Yeah,
What?
I guess I know. I mean, I think, but aren't really the best stories ones that are driven by your personal obsession? You know, I think that to really, I mean, if you look at any long-term project or in-depth project and you find out a little bit about what the reporter started doing, it just boils down to obsession of some kind. You know, you have to be, it has to light your fire. You know, it's like anything. It's like you almost have a chemical reaction, you know.
So did you get obsessed with this particular rare disease? Did you get obsessed with this particular family? Or did you get obsessed with this idea of patients taking control of the clinical investigation into treatments?
The last one, I think more. I mean, yes, I eventually did get obsessed with the disease. I know a lot about Niemann-Pick type C. I read so many scientific papers, and I did get obsessed with all of the families and the scientists. I mean, I really dug in, and I mean, I visited their labs and their houses and went to their fundraisers and would meet them wherever they were going to be. But I think what initially started to get me excited is, again, and maybe it was just partly this being fueled a little bit by my sense of powerlessness in my own personal life, I got really excited by the concept that they were going to assert power, that they were going to say, we're equals. You know, it's not that, you know, you're the professional that have the credentials, the elite academic institutional degrees, the years of training. we think that our credentials as experts in living with this fatal disease, in caring 24/7 for people who have it, in struggling to do that, that's a form of expertise that is as valuable, not more valuable, I'm not saying more, but as valuable as your expertise. And we need to share it in order to advance. You can't advance as quickly without me, and I can't advance as quickly as I need to without you. We have to work together.
So you're working in an open-ended way.
Mm-hmm.
You're collecting just story notes of any sort. I mean, dialogue, papers, you're building files. You have no idea where you're headed, as
Right.
best I can tell.
When
And
put
are
it that
you
way.
are you having conversations with an editor at this point? You're saying, geez, I think I really got my hands on a great thing, or is this like your secret?
Yeah, I was a little worried that somebody would tell me, oh, I don't know. So initially what happened, the way I approached it was probably a little bit more strategically, in that along the way of sort of collecting all this random stuff and writing down scenes and thinking about the broader themes that I saw emerging, it started making kind of folders that were both chronological but also thematic. Like if there was a theme that struck me, I started putting stuff in folders according to theme. But along the way, there happened to be news that started to emerge. They found a compound that had, was being studied, and there were some academic papers that came out. So I started pitching actual stories that were news related. Oh, there was a paper on this particular repurposing of this drug. I think we should do a story on repurposing drugs. And so I would be able to use some of that reporting in an actual story that got in the paper. One time I pitched a story. One of the families was going to apply for an orphan drug designation, which is you go to the FDA and you have to fill out all these papers and submit all this data. And if you get the designation, if a drug eventually gets approved, it helps trigger all these benefits that you get for orphan drug approval. And she was going to do it at this special workshop that FDA was starting to run around the country to try to encourage more pharmaceutical companies to file for orphan drug designation. So I pitched a story about FDA's growing interest in trying to get groups to file orphan drug designations, and got to do reporting that way. So I found a way to continue on a news vein, but didn't yet spring it on anybody that I thought this would be a great idea.
And so you managed to spin this out for 5 or 6 years, 5 years or so, 5 years or so. As Sarah's minding her own business, having a productive career here, doing other things. And I want to telescope this part of the process a little bit so we can get to the cooperative venture here, and then we'll backtrack a bit. Because I'm very interested, and I think we're interested in some of the problems that you encountered as you embed with a family and with a patient population like this. But so you've spun this out for 5 years. You have an ungodly, where do you keep all these notes? I mean, are they all electronic? Do you have a garage in Boston that you keep barrels of unfiled papers in?
I have those plastic bins,
Plastic bins. This is very high tech. Okay.
and notebooks get thrown in, and
Right.
file folders, printing out all my notes all the time, and trying to put them by chronological order so I won't go nuts later.
So you won't go nuts later.
If I wasn't already.
So there comes a moment. Let's gloss over the fast forward for 5 years of you throwing notebooks into bins and filing things by themes and telling little stories to your editors to kind of buy yourself some more time on this journey you've decided to go on. But there's a moment when you have to sort of
Right.
pitch. When you've decided that, well, no, you have a really big story here that you'd like to tell, a front page story of some sort. Sarah, in the meantime, is poised to become involved in this, but doesn't know this yet. She's still happily unconscious of what's about to happen to her.
Right.
So tell us about that meeting. There's an editors meeting. What happens?
Well, so first there was a news event that actually made
news event.
an actual news event that made me feel like, you know what, this is the moment, which is this compound that they had found the NIH agreed to launch a trial. A clinical trial was going to get underway. And that generated other tension because some of the families wanted to take it experimentally outside the trial on their own, collecting their own data. And the scientists wanted everyone to go into the official NIH clinical trial, which would be used for potential drug approval if the drug was proven to be safe and effective in the children. So that raised further tension along my theme that I was already interested in, which is this, both the collaboration and the tensions. And there was an actual news story. So I thought to myself, this is it. This is the right moment. There is a concrete thing that's happening, a trial that for 5 years I've been collecting data on. I'm going to ask an editor if he thinks this would be a good idea. And I called one of my friends, sort of like, can I just bounce this off of you?
One of your friends at the paper.
At the paper, but not my direct boss yet. Like I was waiting to see, if I, and I said, listen, I've become obsessed with this and I think this is a great story. What do you think? And he said, I think you need to write this down and as a proposal. And then you can start showing it to your boss and to other editors and then, we'll see. He said, it sounds promising though, but you got to write a proposal.
What's a proposal in this context?
So generally proposals are supposed to be no longer than a page where you say, this is my story.
A couple 100 words max.
Yeah, God, they're tired. They don't want to like read a lot of things. And I it was a lot of, it wasn't a page. It was more like 10.
I hear it was more like 20.
That was, later iterations.
Okay.
It got bigger and bigger as they kept telling. It eventually got to be like 45 pages.
Right. In other words, you're handing a proposal that under normal circumstances is anywhere from 10 to 20 times longer than the actual story that you would write.
So I sent it around, thinking that they were going to actually really like kick me out the door, like, whoa, what happened to this woman? She can't even write a one-page proposal anymore, she's really like, but instead they said, you should come to New York and talk about this with a few of us. And I did, and I came into the room and Sarah was there and there were like 30 people at that table. When I walked in the room, I was shocked.
Do you remember this?
Yeah, I did. I didn't. Yeah.
30, is she exaggerating 30 people?
There were a lot.
I mean, there's some big conference rooms at the Journal. You could easily.
There were all the video. There was there were a lot of editors. There was online. There was my boss.
There was maybe 20.
Okay.
So after working, say 5 years or so, 5 years or
It's a
so
lot.
in relative
Seemed
isolation.
like 30.
After working 5 years or so in relative isolation, our heroine, Amy, the poor beleaguered Pulitzer Prize winner, walks into this lion's den of many, many people.
They were all looking at me.
And
It was
I'm
weird.
curious, Sarah, you got into this meeting. What did they tell you was going on? What were you in that meeting to hear?
I think at that point, we thought at that point, the story was a go.
I guess it was a go, but I
It was
don't
a-
think I understood how much
It
of a
was
go
a
it
go
was.
already. Yeah, no, it was a go, and it was. We were on the team, and we were coming to hear what the story was and what the story was about, and we were all kind of sitting in the room to get our piece of it.
Yeah, the signs of the go here, I think, is worth lingering on for a moment. So with the Journal, like most places, whether it's a blog or a newspaper or a magazine, there's sort of story templates. There's this kind of story and that kind of story. And at the Journal, there's a front page story called an A-head, and it's always 999 words long. There's a front page story that's called a leader, and it's never more than 2,000 words long. There are not a lot of 17,000 word stories in our ecology, put it that way. So I'm puzzled here. You're portraying this as you walk into a room and the first thing you've heard about this is you suddenly see 20 people, some of whom you know, but a great many of whom you've never met before, and you have no idea what they do or what the technologies involved might be. Clearly there's a whole thing that's been going on while your back is turned. Is this really what happened, or did you sort of subtly lobby for this?
No, seriously, I didn't know that this was exactly the way it was going to go, that it was going to be so elaborate with.
So was the Journal looking for a multimedia experiment? I mean, I'm struck by this.
I think at this point, yeah, we were looking for long form stories.
Ah, okay.
Right? And this was sort of the mother of all long form.
Well, apparently,
Right.
quite by accident, we have 5 years worth of notes.
But we had read the 45 page.
Was I already at 45 pages at that point? Okay. So,
Yeah, we had read it. We had all read it.
Because
Yeah, I read it.
I will also say there aren't a lot of 45-page proposals in our ecology either.
well,
I should show you
because the editor said to me, think of it like chapters, and give me a chapter by chapter synopsis. Because it did start at like 10 pages with one editor. Then the second editor said, give me a little more. So that probably grew to like maybe 20, 25. And then there was like another editor who sort of said, I really would like to know, think of this as chapters, and then that, do a treatise, I think is what he said, like.
Do a
Sam?
treatise.
Yeah, Sam.
Yeah.
That was the 45 pages.
I see.
I didn't know that stage, though, I had already given
Sam
it. I thought
being
when it
Sam
I had
Enriquez,
it. I
who was
had
one of the
everything.
journal's
Yeah. Back
page
then.
1 project editors, I guess is how you describe what he
Right,
does.
they needed someone to shepherd me.
So
And
here
he
you are
volunteered.
with a lot of very interesting, undigested reporting, a 45-page proposal, and a room full of people like Sarah. So here is how, these are the elements of this experiment, yeah?
Yeah.
So, Sarah, from your standpoint, you've been minding your own business, working on other projects. You get sucked into this sort of thing. People like you get invited to a lot of meetings like this, I expect. So from your standpoint, how did this get started for you?
I fought it.
You fought it.
I did.
You hate the idea of
I
this.
remember we had a whole.
I fought it.
we
You
had a
fought
whole-
it?
I fought it. I thought we were doing a disservice to Amy and a disservice to the story, and I thought it should be a movie or a book. And we had a meeting. I don't know if you
I
were
wasn't
there.
at it, but
We had a meeting
conversation
where I
after.
said, where I thought I was pitching an idea that was backed up, but it was not backed up later on after they threw me under the bus,
Tell us.
where I said, this is how it should be. This story should be this way. It should be 5 chapters thematically.
Oh, right, I remember we had.
Right, we talked
yes,
about
we did, and
this.
I
It
said,
should-
no, no.
Right.
No,
It could be structured.
Bring us into this conversation. Help us out.
We had a
here.
phone conversation afterwards. in which
I
you
don't
told-
remember exactly the structure of it. I just felt that it was going to be a super, super long read, and we were putting it on the internet, and people didn't read that way on the internet, and why were we doing it?
Didn't read what way on the internet?
Long form. That's
They
this
don't read long form.
This was then. Now this was
Right,
back then.
right.
Before.
Now we know that people
Well, now
read
we know
long form.
people read either very short or very long.
Okay.
Right. This is what we know. People read.
So anchor us. This is 2011, 2012.
This was already
No, this is
2013.
This is
no?
2000. This is the
2000
beginning of the project. Yeah.
Okay, beginning of the project,
Initially, I
2013.
thought it was too long and it should be shortened. And I thought
Okay.
we were gonna massacre the story.
You were honest though. When we had that call, you said to me, "Oh, I kind of fought to like kill the thing and like at least put it in half." I remember you saying, "Oh, I only thought it was 5 chapters worth."
Or we should do some of the chapters and not all the chapters. I fought it.
Yeah.
And then I was told we're doing it, and this is what we're doing. And
How does that work?
how does it work?
Well, okay, so here are the two of you. You're getting along very well together. As I understand, the first acquaintance is you take the story that she's worked for 5 years
Tell her
on
no.
and say, you know what, I think that either this is a movie and you should go somewhere else.
Oh, I didn't
or-
say that to
Well,
her,
but
yeah.
I'm saying it.
Right,
I'm saying
okay.
it. You in your various ways said, I want to kill it. This is no good. This isn't
I
going to
didn't
work.
say I wanted to kill
Yeah,
it, and this
yeah.
was no good. This was not going to
So
work.
how did you get dive in then?
How did I dive in once I was told this was
Well,
on?
you were told to do it.
When I was told this is, I was okay. Well, let's.
Who gets to tell you what to do?
Her boss.
Who gets to tell me
Yeah,
what
no, I
to
mean,
do?
who is your?
At this point, it was Sam who was the editor. Sam
Okay, so
said,
this is-
Sam said, "This is what we're doing. This is the story, and this is how we're doing it." And to be honest, the whole process, we were working on what the shape of it was going to be, right? And so there was often, we started here. Let me,
Yeah, show.
I'll show you something interesting.
Yeah, so
Here, wait, let me show you.
Yeah, let's get into the meat of this now.
So these are Amy's word counts.
Amy's
These are you filing stories.
word counts.
So when you filed, what I would do is I would count. You see, chapter 1, I would count the words, and I would see how long we were, and then I would send these to Sam.
So make just so we all understand what these
Yeah.
are. These are the word counts of Amy's many and long proposals?
No, these are the actual
When I
stories.
These are
started
the actual
filing.
Yeah, so
stories.
she,
Yeah.
and I'm,
Okay.
right, so and.
So we're into
and-
the writing process and we're filing
Yeah, we're in the
things.
writing process. So
Okay.
in May, she files
So you
chapter.
two have decided you're going to work together, right? You were still back
What?
trying to.
I
yeah,
don't, I
yeah.
didn't take,
never had
I'm
a
so used to people
problem.
not being on board right away, it was fine.
I see. So that's normal, actually.
It is normal.
Skepticism greets any great enterprise.
Well,
yeah?
we're
Okay.
journalists.
It doesn't
Why
bother
would-
me.
All
Yeah.
right.
So
So
just
she's
keep going.
filing rough drafts.
She's filing, and so that's May, right? She did chapters 1 through 4, and we have 12,000 words, right?
Okay.
And then you can see Sam editing, right? You can see chapter 1 was 2,300 words. It goes down to 2,130, right? So you can see May, June, July, Amy filing. And then somewhere in September, we have this overhaul where we take out chapter 2.
September is this green line here.
To the left of it, see
Yeah,
9/4/2013.
Oh, yeah, they conflated them.
Right.
Does
So
that
then,
make sense?
then they like then
Okay.
They wanted 1 and 2 to be more together.
right. They
All right.
changed we changed the structure of the
Structure.
chapters.
Yeah.
And then so then I count them in a different way, and then I start counting how much Sam is editing things down, right? And then this is sort of the last time I counted. It was in October.
So we're down to, I see 2 numbers there.
Well, we were at 20,000. We were at 20,802
okay.
words, and we ended up
18.
in October at 18,047 words. But this is when the last draft comes in.
Uh-huh.
Things still change from here, so the 17,000 is the actual. But so what I would do is I would send this to Sam, so Sam had a sense of the
Where it was
length,
going.
the length of the story.
Some of it also changed because events changed. It wasn't like we knew in advance how
Right.
this was going to end.
Right, we lost a character, and then we lost. Yeah.
And there also the trial was halted at one point.
Right.
There was a potential safety issue. Oh my God, I had a heart attack because it was like, that could be, the end of the whole enterprise. That would have been.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it started again,
Yeah,
and then we did
good.
it.
So I'm going to put you on hold for a second.
Yeah.
And I want to go with Sarah here. So you're doing more than just simply being a bean counter here and doing word counts. You now join this enterprise as a graphics reporter, as an interactives producer. What do you do? What's your process now? She's had a 5-year running head start.
Right, okay. So I had to get up to speed, and Amy opened the door for me with, let me see if I can get rid of this, and I'll show you guys. So I had to get up to speed with a lot of stuff that Amy was doing, right? And I'm not going to be able to do it this way now that I have to. So what I did was I started reading all the medical material,
Right.
and I started talking to the scientists who started explaining to me what was going on with the disease, and I started talking to the families, and immersing myself in the
But how do you
material so they
see?
understood
okay,
it.
but for those of us who are old-fashioned and
Yeah.
we're used to seeing, tech stories that are decorated with photograph.
Trying to
Yeah.
You're trying to push my buttons?
I am. Well, I don't think I'm trying. Explain to me what you bring to this process. What's your idea about how this is
Okay.
supposed to work?
So my background at the Times is that as a visual journalist, as a graphics editor, you're a reporter, and you don't separate the reporting, the visual reporting, the data reporting, the asset collection. It's not a separate thing. You don't wait for a reporter to come get it. You work in parallel with the reporter. And so this is how I was trained. I was trained to gather all of the visual assets, to understand them, to be able to figure out what I have so that I can tell a story. And so that's really what I do, which is, it's visual journalism. It's journalism. It's the same type of thing that Amy does, where she needs to talk to people and take notes and figure things out and fact check it. But sometimes what I'm gathering is visual material. You want the scene of the crime, or you want data that shows you something. So I'm gathering different things, and instead of speaking in words, although I can write it, I'm expressing myself visually with data or.
So your entry point and your starting point then are her rough drafts, yeah?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
So you get handed one of these
yeah,
2,342 word chapter 1, for instance.
uh-huh,
And then what do you do? I mean, do you go replicate her reporting? Do you go to Amy and say, well, what's this? I mean, how?
No, I started talking to the scientists. I started
Uh-huh.
talking to
So
Porter.
you go and report the story yourself?
Yeah, I figured out, well, I had to figure out what is Niemann type C, what is the disease, how does the disease work. I had to talk to the families. I started gathering material. The family started sending me all the photos. All the family photos went to me, and I started.
Can you show us some of this
Yeah,
stuff?
I can if I can figure out how to.
Well, now this is your computer, so we'll only blame you if it doesn't work.
I know, but I didn't set it up this way. Here we go. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's get rid of that. So, let's see.
You know, we'll talk a little bit about your gathering process, and then we'll look at some mock-ups and things and talk about the
Okay.
design process.
So what I was doing, you can see here, this is, these are all the folders. So I've got all these different folders where I'm starting to gather material. This is an example of all the folders I had for Amy. So it started out as a folder named Amy. And, you know, there's cat videos because we have cats. And there's mock-ups. There's things I've stolen that I like. There's material from Jacoby Mom book, Morella material. These are, you know, Walkley Farm. There's pictures. So I'm just gathering all the materials, including the science material.
Pictures, these are like
Pictures.
family photos.
Yeah,
things.
for instance.
So you've really enlisted the cooperation
I'm working with the families.
of these families.
Amy opened the door to all the families.
I mean, it's fair to
Just
point out at
connected
this
me all.
point
Yeah.
that, like, your key family, correct me if I'm wrong, one of them was like a public relations person for Netscape, and the other one was a former director of marketing or something
At
at Netscape. So these are a husband and wife who are really attuned to how to attract public attention and how
Very
to
sophisticated.
provide you with the raw material. Very sophisticated. That
yeah.
make you nervous?
In terms of like that they might be spinning me on something particular?
Sure.
I mean,
I don't mean lying. I mean,
yeah,
just
I
making
mean,
you part of their adventure, you know? I mean,
no, probably no more than anyone else because I feel like everyone always has a particular point of view. But the other thing that was sort of disarming about them is how open they were. They were really just open about every single aspect of their personal lives. You know, in some ways it made you more trusting of them than you would be ordinarily knowing their kind of media training background because they were just so like lay their cards on the table about everything.
Now, do you think, I'm asking this now because you're asking for a lot of stuff from these people. I mean, literally hundreds of family photographs. Can I come with you when you take your child to get, you know, the drug? Can I be with you in these moments? Normally, there's a process where you have to kind of break down these barriers to get this kind of intimacy. I mean, it's a part of I get the impression with the Hempels that they came to you understanding the raw material that you needed to make this edifice. Am I wrong about that? I mean, is this
I think they had an idea of what we would do I mean, they gave us all their family photos is about what that was a small sliver of
I don't
what
think
they
they were
thought.
expecting though this. Truthfully, I really don't. I mean, I think that they were sophisticated in that they knew that she was going to need a lot of photos, and they were happy to provide them because they document anyway every aspect of their lives. At the meetings that I would go to, which is where I really think actually the intimacy between me and these scientists and families grew, because I mean, I came to every meeting, obscure or big. I mean, I was like there all the time. So they were sort of like, wow, she's, you know, if you see someone all the time, it convinces you that this person is deeply interested. So, but, you know, and they documented a lot of those meetings. They would take pictures at the meetings,
okay?
which was helpful.
Amy, can I follow
Yeah.
up on that?
Please.
So I'm I remember I used to always feel, you know, I was happy when the art people got involved, but I used to always feel vaguely uncomfortable that, you know, the reporter's relationship with their sources is very fraught, you know, always very fragile, even when you're feeling there's something very nerve-wracking about having somebody else, involved in that. So are you just totally accustomed to that at this point, or do you have, it could be useful for people in the room who are also
Yeah.
trying to sort of
Right.
working in threes instead of the usual two reporter relationship, like how do you navigate that?
So there were two different things. There were also videographers, which we haven't really talked about,
yeah,
because we did some films that were embedded into the story. In those cases, the videographers asked me if I would go with them. At first they said to me, it would be helpful, we'll write our own questions because we have our own vision of what we want to cover, but it would be helpful if instead of me, the videographer, having to hold the camera and ask questions, we'll have you ask the questions, and they'll look at you when they're talking, and I'll just video. And I think that they did that because they were nervous that there would not be enough intimacy if it wasn't me, that they would feel. With Sarah, I do recall us having some conversations. I didn't know Sarah also. We had...
Have you ever worked together?
No, we
No.
really didn't know each other. So there was
Right.
also this building of trust between ourselves. And, we had some conversations. I knew she was a mom, I thought, and we would talk like that, she, like me, it was pretty easy to put ourselves in the position of thinking about what if this was our experience, what if this was our children, how would that make us feel? And in my conversations with Sarah, I felt she was a very sensitive person and that she would be sensitive to their sensitivities. And I think I even said to you, and if they resist, back off, right? Don't press, because we can think about it or come back another way. Because you're right, it is nerve-wracking, but at that stage, it was such a huge enterprise that the entire paper had invested in that I kind of had to go with it in one sense, right? I couldn't be overly controlling and say, I just couldn't be in charge of every single thing. It was too big.
Yeah,
Well,
and I
yeah,
asked,
go ahead from your standpoint.
from the beginning, I didn't start by saying, emailing her and saying, give me your sources.
Right.
It was, I'd like to talk to these people. Is it okay if I talk to them? I started asking permission, and then I would call Amy back with questions like, what does it mean, and why is this happening? And so it was,
Mhm.
and then there's a certain point where you have to trust that your colleague is a professional, and, I assume that's part of the equation, but it was just I wasn't going to push any boundaries because it becomes a story that I have respect for the story, and I'm trying to get the story, so it would not be
No,
behoove
but
me
I think it's fair to
step on
say
any
that
toes.
historically, there is a kind of has been a built-in tension as both these technologies of multimedia storytelling have developed and grown, but also as our appetite for them has grown. There has been,
Yes.
a long-standing tension between reporters and then whatever you want to call that other side of the house, the art people, the graphics people, the video desk,
Right, and that was back when there was a division between the
Right.
people. You had to only write. You could only write, and then there was a page, and the page had a hole in it, and they wanted to break up the gray.
Right,
Right,
exactly.
and nobody had to, and so you could get away with that type of attitude. But now you're expected to go out and shoot and understand audio, and honestly, you learn things from the visual journalists as well. It's no longer this sort of bifurcated, there's the art people, and then, it is in some ways, but it's not the most functional.
Yeah, there's a
set
history
of
of,
we
there's a
function.
history of eye rolling.
There's
and
a
what's-
history,
And
yeah.
what's interesting is
Yeah.
how you two, I think, embody the kind of new set of relationships.
What's interesting too is in the long run, it may well be that there's really no bifurcation whatsoever, and
Yeah.
maybe not at a big vertical operation like the Journal, but in general, the people who are doing these immersive pieces now are often doing both pieces.
Right, yeah.
They're both the text writer and the visual.
It's about the story. Ultimately, it's about the story. It's really just about the story. What's the best way to tell the story? And sometimes you need a picture,
Yeah.
and-
I also think, truthfully, that let's say you're just a print reporter, which is really how I spent my entire career, is I'm a print reporter. But you should be thinking visually. When I go reporting anything, I'm not just reporting the events. I'm actually, I almost think of myself as kind of like a movie script, right? What's the scene? Let me set the scene, you know. I always take notes on what people are wearing. I try to always jot down what's in the room. I try to write down if someone has a facial expression that strikes me, like, you know, a scientist maybe who seems like he's not supporting what a patient says, or a patient who seems upset, you know, starts to cry and get teary. I'm trying to think visually, even though I'm writing words.
But now maybe going forward, you'll be shooting video at those moments. You know, there are a lot of
Can you
people-
each envision doing what the other does? I mean, I'm curious about
Yeah.
that. I mean, I've thought about that a lot.
I-
You know.
No, I don't. I can't do what Amy does.
I can't do what Sarah does. It was awesome. I was
Yeah.
Can't do what Amy does. I don't want.
But I think that in the long run, I mean, I wonder if that's a generational thing or
Right.
not, because I think in the long run, people are going to be doing.
I think
both.
it's already true, Dan, that
Yeah.
it may be, in your case, Amy, that maybe you're just not technologically a hobbyist that way, but I know that many people now, as part of their note-taking, take photographs, do video,
Right.
even if they're not planning to use it as raw material for an immersive. It's a great way of taking notes. Record the interviews, walk around the house and take footage, grab actual documents or take pictures of them. And I don't know how it works from your side, but perhaps you'll get more attuned and more comfortable with text.
No, I can write.
Well, no, I didn't mean
I mean,
to suggest it.
I do, and I do write, and
Yeah.
I do write. I just don't.
No,
I just don't
I
write
have some of your
perfect.
essays in here, so I know
Oh,
that.
Jesus.
Um,
Okay. But I don't. I'm more a right brain, left brain mix. Just naturally, that's where I.
Well, because I sometimes think that maybe what the
Yeah.
difference is going to end up being is not inclination, not journalistic role, but rather a matter of skill sets.
Yeah. So it's partially your brain.
Amy knows how to shoot, you know how to code. Maybe, you know.
It's just what. It's just. Yeah. I don't.
So
there it
let's
is.
dive back into this for a sec.
Okay.
And so we've got your folders, but what's in the folders? What do you?
Well, I actually.
What kinds
there's-
of things are you looking
There's
for?
so much stuff in the folders that I really couldn't
All right.
even give you a lot of what was. I couldn't move a lot of it because
All
there's
right.
so much stuff in the folders.
Okay. But so photographs. What else? What's
Oh,
the
you wanna
graphic
do
reporting
okay,
process?
so one of the things, do you want to do the severity index thing? One of the
The
things,
severity scale,
yeah,
that was
one of the
good.
things I was very interested in is there's this, was measuring, you know,
Measuring.
because I do data journalism, and you, especially in a case like this, you want something to, you really want to harden something. You want to know, okay, how serious is this? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, how serious is this? And so I was speaking to one of the doctors very early on, and he gave me this thing. Actually, this should be
His paper?
the severity index.
Oh, this is, yeah, this is fascinating. So the Table 1 NPC Clinical Severity Scale.
So, oops, I'm going to do that. Hold on, let me turn around.
Here we go.
Um,
So this is your raw material. This has got tossed to you by a doctor. What does it clinically represent?
What this is an index that Denny Porter put together to measure the progress of the disease. And the disease, it's, pejoratively called childhood Alzheimer's.
Only by the Hempels.
Only
It's what-
pejoratively by the Hempel?
No, just only generally. Nobody, it
Yep,
didn't
yep.
really quite get adopted as that. It's
Okay.
not childhood Alzheimer's.
So the way that I understood it was that it was that you could think of it like Alzheimer's.
Right, you
in
can.
that-
There's dementia, it's progressive.
Right, and there's a
the
reversal.
skills.
There's a reversal.
Mhm.
And
So you have the scale.
so you have this scale, and the scale was what he put together was to measure how the children were not progressing but regressing in a way. I mean, it's the progression. So this
Yeah.
is this index, and so to me, I thought, well, this really, really represents the heart of the matter. Like, what is happening with these kids? Their gaze starts to change, and the way their balance starts to change, and the way
Swallowing,
they're swallowing,
talking.
talking. So there's all of these.
So you're looking for a way to turn that
I'm looking for a way.
very dry, clunk of text
Yeah.
into something.
Like I'm trying to figure out if there's ways that I can visualize it. And I went through I kept this up near my desk, and I kept thinking, like, this is the way, like, maybe we can chart it, and we can show where these kids are on the scale.
So each one of those dots is a human being? Is that the
No,
idea?
this was sort of my idea of, like, where are they on the scale? Can I chart it? Can I show
Okay.
it? And I kept going back to it, and I thought, well, maybe I can pair images of, I was doing this the entire process, maybe I can pair images of, like, the way the children's eye movement is to explain eye movement. I thought, there's got to be a way to, like, harden this information. And I kept going back at it, and then we had these photos of these children as well. This larger.
And so each one of these children has this disease.
Each one of the children has the disease, and I thought, well, perhaps they could be representative, and we would use the severity index to represent the kids. And ultimately, what I ended up doing was I threw all of that out, and we just showed the kids. Oops, sorry, guys.
So you turned that severity chart,
So the severity,
that
the
text,
data,
into this gallery.
into the gallery, because ultimately it was like this was really what was the meaningful piece of it. Was you didn't need to see the data to understand the way things had changed for the children. You just need to see the children. And so this was for somebody who's, like, trying really hard to make charts and trying to visualize things and trying to visualize data. It really just came down to, like, the best way to show the progression of the disease is to show you the children, because then you see the children and you see, and we did a lot of different things with this. We had video of the kids as well, and we were working on making these, so you rolled over it and you went to video, yeah.
Did you go to the conference in Baltimore?
No, there was
I
a
did.
photographer who was there as well,
Yeah.
and with Amy,
Yeah. I was
So
there.
we shot. So the kids were shot on white screen, and we didn't know what we were going to do with these photos. And this is how. Do you
Yeah,
have a
please
question?
write down here.
Yeah. I don't know if this is the right moment, but one of the things that struck me is through photos, through video, through everything, you're getting so much access to these people, and particularly Chris, the mother, like in the last chapter where she's the author of the paper, reading that, like, it's so emotional. And I just am curious how, when you're working with these people this closely, and the topic is so devastating, and you don't know how the story is going to end, like maybe they've been giving their children these drugs that are really problematic. Like, how did you handle that in terms of assuring their trust and knowing how to tell their story and how they were going to react to it? I guess my question is, what was their reaction?
Right, I didn't know how they were going to react. Yeah. So they had varying reactions to they didn't quite know exactly how it was going to look. So I think that was part of it, that it was like, wow, kind of shocking and so long. And they took them a long time to read it and everything. But there were different reactions. I think overall, most of them, the reaction was, we're just so, like, kind of honored that the Wall Street Journal would give us this kind of space, because it's a very, very rare disease. You're talking maybe 500 people, and it's just very hard to get any kind of attention, and this was an abnormal amount of attention, by any stretch of the imagination. But there were some parents who did not like the story. They felt I emphasized one family more than another, that I couldn't tell everyone's story, so some stories didn't make it into, the piece, even though they spent as much time, with me. They were unhappy about that. It was interesting, a number of people reacted to the scene where Chris Hempel cuts her hair in the middle of the night. And, for me...
So, I'm sorry, just for those of you who don't, it's a very powerful scene. husband and wife come home from a cocktail party, I guess.
Yeah, birthday party, but
Birthday
they,
party,
yeah,
they've had a
they
couple
had
glasses
had
of
some
wine, feeling a
Yeah.
little, and well, why don't you tell it?
Well, Chris wakes up at like, they're sort of like, come home late and kind of getting ready to go to bed, and it's, she sort of wakes up sort of at like 2 in the morning and just decides that she's going to shave off all of her hair. And she's had long hair her entire life, and her hair's really pretty. And she goes into their bathroom, the master bathroom, and she takes this like razor and starts kind of like that movie, G.I. Jane, where
Oh, right, yeah.
yeah, like starts doing it, and her husband sort of wakes up, and he like comes into the bathroom, and he's in shock, like he cannot believe that she's cutting off all her hair, and he just says, "Let me help you," and he ends up, she ends up sort of leaning over the sink, and he's shaving her hair for her. It's so intimate, right? It's like, it says something not just about her and her bereavement and her kind of like willingness to take her grief and do anything with it, but also their relationship and their marriage. It's like so intimate, right? With a husband and a wife and cutting hair and stuff. And so for me, it was like one of the most important scenes. And with the editor, we debated a lot of where to put it in the story. Too soon, and you don't care enough about her, so it's not as effective. Too late, and you lose the fact that she's willing to do something, and it kind of symbolizes what she does later. So that was one of the things. But there were some, when I called Chris and I was sort of telling her I'm going to be using particular things, I wanted her to know in advance that I was going to use the hair cutting scene. I just felt it important that she not be shocked that it was in there. Yeah, well, that was later, but I told her that I was going to use the scene, and she was like, her first reaction was like, really? Why? And I said, it's just in a really important moment, and I need to use it, and I just want you to know. And she said, okay, it's okay, you can use it. But there were some parents who said, why did you spend so much time on the hair when you could have brought in other families or brought in more about the disease, but there were a number of readers who wrote me and said that hair cutting scene was the best scene. That's what grabbed me. So like, it was just very interesting that not all the families even liked how much time I spent on certain things.
Well, you own the spotlight. The two of you have a huge spotlight, and you're making choices about how to direct that spotlight.
Right.
Based on a variety of things. I wonder, is part of the decision like how photogenic these people are, or what? No, but I mean, whether you get access to neat pictures like that, or they talk well. I mean, does that enter into the choice at all?
Oh, for me, no.
Well, no, but
for Sarah, maybe.
because
Yeah.
there's a tension here that I'd like to linger on for a minute between the text and the images. I mean, that we go 5, 6, 7 paragraphs, and then we encounter like a really strong image or a really very dramatic piece of video. Or one of the arresting things that you did is there's a 2 handwritten letters by a young person who has the disease before they start taking the treatment, and you can't read a word they're saying, and then afterwards. I mean, there's a competition here for attention.
Right.
And I just wonder how that affects your choices when you're doing this graphic reporting. I mean, now she's looking for the dramatic scene of the woman cutting the hair off. What's the equivalent for you? What's the, oh wow, I've got this, I've got to use that visual?
There was a ton of them. I mean, I think, and they were all really in support of the story. So I know it's, not as fun, but I don't see it as tension so much, is that it was a weaving. And, there was writing in it. We were very specific. Sam was very specific about writing.
Sam, the editor.
Sam, the editor, would think about how we wrote in and out. I was very, where we wrote in and out of the images, where the images were placed. So it wasn't a sort of, and there was a ton of things. And I mean, there was so much, there's volumes of material. And so much on the cutting room floor as well. So
what about making the scientists, there's no way that a scientist, it's hard for them to be as emotionally compelling as parents who are going to lose their children if something doesn't happen. You know, and I think we did talk a lot about how can we humanize the scientists, because you don't want for this to really work. You know, you can't necessarily expect people to have the same emotional feelings for a scientist as they would for a parent of a sick child, but you do want them to have emotional sympathy for the scientists and some of the moral dilemmas they're confronted with in trying to work with the parents as partners in a new way.
Can I follow up on that? I think that if I was writing it, I would have been tempted to do even more policy than you did. I mean, you did some, for sure. On the other hand, it's even harder to generate sympathy or even interest in the sort of macro policy questions about how do we allocate scarce health dollar resources, you know, than it is to get people interested in the basic research, the scientific process. At the same time, the societal issues, you know, raised by this about, you know, how do we allocate those scarce resources are really interesting and very relevant and very timely, you know, considering that we're in this big time of tumult and change in how we deal with healthcare. So how did you sort of navigate that, Amy, and to what extent did you want to do more than you wound up doing? Because I felt like you did some, but I felt like you could have done a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, there was quite a bit that ended up getting cut, and I think there was a feeling that it dragged the narrative. The pacing was really important, so that was part of it.
Yeah.
But I also think that one of the sort of things about this project, what the parents were doing is, because of the scarcity of resources, they put in their own money to jumpstart this. The resources didn't start kicking in until they had moved it along enough that NIH, which was trying to, you know, had come up with a new institute whose mandate was to look for rare diseases and try to speed up drug development. In some ways, they incentivized the NIH to put in some of the scarce resources because they invested their own funding in jumpstarting this project to get it to a certain point. And then the concept behind the NIH is we're then going to incentivize drug companies to take this into the expensive phase 3 drug approval trial, which is, you know, the most expensive part of the project. NIH doesn't want to do that. So they then add their own resources to get it through phase 1, maybe phase 2, with the hope that there's enough promising data that then you get a private company that puts in resources. So, you know, we tried to show this model, but you're right, it wasn't directly saying, and here's some of the policy issues. It was more trying to show that, because when you start getting into some of the kind of weeds of the policy issues, it's not as broadly interesting to people, and it does come at the price of the speed of the narrative, and there's always that tension of you want the story to move.
A lot of what makes the story move, of course, is the spine of the text narrative itself. But a lot of what makes it move with an immersive like this is how the overall design is set, the decisions that are made about how things like this, the videos or whatever, are going to be used or embedded. Sarah, I know that you all went through a couple of iterations trying to arrive at this particular look, and for those of you who haven't had a chance to sort of really go through the whole thing, I mean, there's some conscious decisions to use, for instance, certain kinds of stick figure childlike animations as kind of chapter breaks. There's a particular decision to use certain kinds of photos off in the margins as kind of interesting sidelights, most of them family photos, but then things right in the text that stop you and compel your attention. Right. So I wonder if you could just give us a sense of the thought process there. I know you have some mock-ups the early mock-ups.
Okay, so let's see if we can do this full screen. We went through, we didn't know, what we ended with, full screen.
There you go. Well, that's very dramatic.
That's very dramatic. We didn't know what we wanted initially, and this was a sort of shortcoming that we wanted to fix in the future. In these next projects, was we didn't know how we wanted the feel to be of the piece. So we did a series of of mock-ups. I did a series of mock-ups at the beginning just to sort of figure out what was like the visual tone of the piece, and we went through a series of these, just stylistically having discussions. You know, how far do we want to take the childlike drawings? Do we want to take it to this degree or not? And then we landed on this particular one here. Let me hide this. Where we had these drawings from this woman, Lily Carré, who was our ultimate illustrator, and she did this very beautiful, simply rendered drawing that she sewed. And there was just something about that feeling that we wanted, and we chose that. We just, you know, we sort of landed at the place where it wants to be very intimate, quiet read that doesn't get in the way of the piece. So we did a series of these mock-ups just to sort of figure out what was the feel of the design, and we wanted to make sure that you were able to read it and then be immersed in it in a way where you weren't paying attention to, like, oh, look, there's a parallax scroll here. So we sort of iterated through different.
And how many people are involved in that process? Tell me a little bit about her process. I understand she's got a garbage bag full of notebooks.
Garbage bag.
Tell us a little bit about this aspect of it. How does it work?
This varies because this varies because people leave and move and you get new managers. But this is a small group of us, maybe 3 or 4 of us, just sort of brainstorming and looking. It was me and the photo editor and the video editor and Mike Allen, who was the and Sam.
Overall project.
Yeah, and we would go through it and we would sort of say, you know, we would look at them and all discuss where we wanted to go with it. And it helped us crystallize what we thought we wanted for the piece, which was intimate, quiet, hand-rendered, something that you would find, sort of found objects, things you would find on the refrigerator.
I don't have a good vocabulary with which to ask this question, so I may thrash for a second. But, you know, in traditional long-form narrative, they're templates, they're tricks. There's a vocabulary of pacing and, oh, we needed this here, or we needed that there. In this evolving design for journalistic multimedia visual narrative, what's the vocabulary? I mean, oh, I just think that looks nice. I mean, how does this get cast and propelled forward as a matter of visual journalism?
It's not a template. Mm-hmm. It's definitely not a template. Just like your stories wouldn't be poured into a template, we couldn't pour Amy's story into a template, and we couldn't pour the visual, you know, and then just put visual elements with it. It's really. If it supports the story, the language is, you know, we have this moment in the story where we're talking about the haircut, and we have these pictures of her cutting the hair, and are they good enough pictures? Are they not? You know, what picture do we need to show to support this? Like, mm-hmm. Oh, I have this amazing picture. Mm-hmm. We need to hear from the doctors now. I have this debate between Hugh Hempel and Denny Porter speaking to this exact point in the story. This would be a good place to put it in. So the material is really just what the material is. It's just like.
Okay, but if I may respectfully say, that's not what the material is. That's something that a designer has come up with because it has an aesthetic and maybe emotional appeal. It's not a family photo of a woman cutting her hair, where, you then have to make a technical and aesthetic decision as to whether it's a good photograph. You're constructing a very elaborate and mobile and immersive frame for a story that is itself part of the storytelling. So that's what I'm trying to understand.
I don't think I understand your question.
Okay, well, all right. So why do you decide that's okay in the moody thing of the moon and the was it flying geese?
That was a group consensus, and that was an emotional.
It was too stark.
What? Which one?
The trees.
Oh, well, yeah, it was consent. I mean, it was, you know, do we want to go in this direction? You know, part of it, it was a feeling. It's evocative, right? You're trying mm-hmm. to evoke an emotional feeling when you do these, but they need to make sense. So,
I like the way it was softer because it's such difficult material that, I don't know, I feel like if they had gone with the image of the trees, it would have scared people from reading.
I mean, I deliberately went in this direction because they were, to make a point.
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
showing them this because,
Right.
not necessarily because I think I want to do it, but because I want to show them. Because, editors often have these ideas in their heads they
Yeah.
can't articulate, and so you're like, okay, so this is what you're talking about. Let me show you how it actually works or doesn't work.
Right.
So sometimes you're throwing things out there to so you can just knock them down later on.
Yeah, because it's
Yeah.
already so ominous,
Yeah.
right? It's like,
Yeah. But you're also making decisions, and I want to, these are great decisions that you're making, but that the visuals are now part of the active storytelling in a way that I don't think they are traditionally. I mean, they're not off to the side. I'm getting to a certain point, and instead of getting a moody and articulate and lovely, colorful word picture of what this woman looks like, she's going to look at me, and she's going to blink. And that's a very powerful and subtle thing. Or there are certain moments where, to sort of say Dan's question about kind of policy ramifications, where instead of having 3 or 4 boilerplate wonky graphs from Amy, we're going to have 2 talking heads. We're going to have a scientist, a doctor who's saying, well, the clinical trial works this way, and then a distraught but under control husband of a dying child is going to talk for a minute. I mean, those are not decorations. Those are active and powerful storytelling elements. So I'm trying to get you to explain to us
How they came to be?
how you made that framing decision, that this
May I
is going to work
interrupt?
this way. Yes, I'd insist on it.
I would just like to disagree with one thing you said, just that, all of these things, not necessarily disagreeing with this, but, you're saying Sarah's making these choices and they add an emotional element and they make you feel a particular way. It's not that other situations don't do that. I mean, every day in the newspaper, it's like 6 columns, all in a grid, very reassuring, and all that does too. That
Oh,
tells people
absolutely.
emotionally that this is a legitimate publication. We're publishing facts and all of those things. So it works in the same way. It's just less. We're just so used
Right.
to seeing these other
I-
situations.
Okay, first, I understand what I'm doing is I'm asking a question in order to get a response. So you're right that everything does that. A traditional newspaper or magazine format, but somebody's already decided that, okay, and it's set, and that's just the way it's done. Here, somebody had a golden moment where they got to invent this visual narrative vocabulary, and I insist that you explain that to us.
So, okay, so it's collaborative. It's
Uh-huh.
a very collaborative. And we had the video, at the beginning with the video team, we decided like, we want to have these opening moments
Show
that
us
we
one.
were
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
called, let's just go another. Like here's Dylan, like we wanted to have these things we called atmospherics. And so the atmospherics are meant to start you into each chapter. We talked about, the video team shot examples of walking into the frame. They just walked through the hallways and like, the blinking. First, we did versions where they walked into the frame this way, where the camera came into them this way. So there was a series of like figuring out what is the best approach for the visual elements, and then there was a lot of discussion, about which elements can I put I would come to them and I would say, I'm in this chapter and I need a break, I need a visual break, and what do we have? And I would go back to the materials and here's the visual break. We're very like those pictures, those drawings of the kids,
Yeah,
or
here's-
these these illustrations, they were placed deliberately to give the reader a pause.
Mm-hmm.
So, Amy's writing and she gets to a certain point in the chapter, and, an operating room is prepared. They wheeled Dylan into surgery, and you're in this place in her story that you're just feeling so tense. And it gives you a second to actually take a breath and lean back. I've done some projects where I watch people watch them, and
Mm-hmm.
they did a project where I had several people watch it, and they leaned in at the same time, they laughed at the same time, they exhaled at the same time, and that was when I started to learn the idea of integrating the visual elements in an emotional way to the story. And that's what I just tried to do with Amy's piece, was take all of this amazing material that the video team did, and that went with Amy's amazing story, and weave them together in a way that led you through the piece and gave you a break when you needed it, and gave you intensity when you needed it, or more when you needed it. And
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
So Amy, we know that it seems like largely the visual elements followed the storytelling, but to what extent was the textual storytelling altered by the visual elements? Or, I mean, if you had told the story traditionally, would you have changed it at all? To what extent did you make changes?
The only change I think that I made was, and this wasn't so much a change, but like the opening of the first chapter, I rewrote a number of times. It was really hard to get the right tone and to figure out what the right scene was. If you lose them there, they're not going to go any further. I think the first chapter was.
But that really had nothing to do with the visual elements.
Well,
that was
was-
just you
No,
trying
it
to get
does-
the
it
texture.
does have
Or
to
did
do
it?
with the
Or did
visuals.
It did.
It does have to do with the visuals, because
There was at one point I had a particular opening and we decided no, that doesn't work. And then I had said to Sam, I have this other idea. She was talking to me about going in and seeing her kids sleeping and what she was thinking. And Sam said, oh, that's actually excellent, because Sarah was saying she had this picture of the girls sleeping, and that sounds like it would work together. And so knowing that she had this beautiful thing, and I was kind of leaning in that direction, so I didn't really change it, but it did reinforce when I knew I needed to rewrite the opening, and I had been thinking, I should do the sleeping scene, and
So that's
Where you-
that's
go
interesting.
ahead.
That's
Yeah,
interesting
yeah.
to me, because a lot of people that are sort of tinkering with long form at places like Matter or Atavist or whatever, this is still a text-first process, it seems to me, maybe because it's legacy media, or, for whatever reason, text is still driving visuals and not vice versa. But I actually think that that's starting to change in some contexts, and I wonder whether in the long run, in the journal, that will be the case, and I wonder what you each have to say about that, sort of thinking forward, maybe especially Sarah.
Yeah.
Well, so it is changing. This is a really good example of a piece that you could read about how this one was done, but this is something The Guardian did. And they actually built the story around the multimedia elements. So they knew what they knew.
No one is going to want to live
They
under a
also did
regime
autoplay,
that
which
says
is really
that
annoying.
data can be used to.
But that was one of their choices. But they knew what
It's
topics.
really well done, except for the autoplay.
Except for the autoplay. They knew what
In
the
the
topics
end,
were.
we can't be
Yeah.
transparent about most of these
Stop autoplay.
issues, and we have to.
Okay. They actually had multimedia pieces, and they knew what the themes were, and they knew what the topics were, and they knew what the graphics were going to be, and then they went and they wrote the story around it. So, and Gabe Dance on the source, if you Google Gabriel Dance, Guardian, and Source, he writes about this process, and he said he was amazed because he's a visual journalist, and it never occurred to him to do it that way. So, and there's a lot of the stuff that you see which are very photo-driven,
Yeah.
very video-driven. I think Atavist is more word-driven, but there's.
I think it depends on the piece, but yeah, you're right. Amy, from your point of view, can you imagine as a legacy text journalist, can you imagine changing your process so much that visuals would drive text more than text driving visuals? It would be hard for me.
I don't think so. I don't. But I think what drives all of these projects is it has to start with someone being passionate about a particular project. So if the project originates with the visual person, you know, like if it's their passion, their obsession, then I could actually see it happening that way. You know, I think it has to, it's not so much if you let one form drive another form. I think it's more like who's sort of coming with the idea, who's really obsessed the most. And then that starts to drive it. And I think, like, if I had known going back that actually this is what's going to happen, I think I would have done what Lee was saying. I think I would have gone with my iPhone and photographed every single thing at every single meeting, and, you know, every document and every this, every that. I probably would have done it differently. It just started kind of, you know, like just as something I was kind of curious about. It was really driven by curiosity in one sense, and so you approach it differently than if you already know, I want to do a big immersive project that's going to have a lot of visuals, and you plan differently when you know what you're doing.
Well, and Sarah, I think I'd be interested in your point of view on this, but it seems to me that one of the reasons that this was great to focus on was because this was an experiment, and the journal now going forward has made some decisions about how it's going to approach these kinds of things, how it wants to train everybody to do them, based in part on the discussions and the trial and error of this particular trials project. But it seems to me that going forward, it's not a question of scale, that you'll be thinking about this with photographs, or is there a cool piece of sound or whatever, for any story, for every story, regardless of how large or small it is. I mean,
That's true. Yeah.
now you're the visual graphics reporter. I just teed you up, so
Oh,
go for
am I
it.
supposed to say yes?
No, or
go again?
disagree with me. I mean, maybe I'm wasting my time running around taking pictures
I
of
see,
everything.
Because, right.
Because I don't know what I'm doing. Because see, the next question
it depends
is
on
skills.
the story.
Is
Skills. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it depends. Okay, it depends on the story, and it depends on what you're good at. And I don't think everybody has to be able to do everything. I think you have to be able to do some things well. Oops. You have to be able to master some things, and you can't master others. And so, you know, it's sort of a follow your bliss type of thing. What should your skills be? Your skills should be that thing that you're obsessed with and you're passionate about. So if you love data, you should be chasing data. And if you love video and photography and writing, you should be doing that. Should you be coding debate?
I don't know. You're learning to code?
I'm learning to code. I'm a toddler coder.
Why?
Because it helps me understand what the possibilities are for the way my projects, and because I want to be able to build things, and that's how you build things. You build things in code, and you have to not be, you know, it also teaches you to be a maker to some degree. It allows you to make things more, but there's also a lot of things coming from the other direction. There's tools as well, so it's just how do you best express yourself is my take on the whole thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
Oh, I'm just curious, going back to, you know, the beginning where, like Sarah in particular, you thought that maybe this should be a book or a movie, and I'm wondering, you know, now that it's all done, what both of you think you've gained from doing it in this form versus had it been a book, had it been a movie, had it been, you know, a traditional series of articles. You know, what do you think you've gained, and what do you think maybe you've lost, if anything?
So the thing that's really challenging about this is that you don't know the outcome. You don't know if this drug actually works yet because the trial is still ongoing. So if you're going to do a book, you actually need to know if it works or not. I don't think you can fairly take people, you know, for 300 pages and not tell them at the end whether the drug actually does something, you know. So, you know, I think that the way this was, you know, we were worried. We very much did not want the story to turn on whether the drug worked or not, because we knew in our time frame we would not know the answer to that question, and that would be unfair to take our readers that far, even, you know, in this kind of thing, not just a book. So instead, it turns on, are they going to be able to get over their differences and collaborate, you know, and sometimes the emotions and tensions run so high that they fracture, and you don't know whether this is even going to move forward, you know, not whether even the drug works, but whether they work. So I think for what this was with the story, that this actually was the most effective choice. I don't think it would have been as good as a book or a movie without knowing the ultimate outcome of the drug trial.
Even though the story is actually about neither the drug working or not working, but rather the success of parents inserting themselves as powerful players into a clinical process.
Yeah, I think that question worked really well for this format. And, you know, I still personally want to know whether the trial works. You know, that for me, that's still a burning question.
What did you learn from this?
I learned how to make one of those. Some stamina. This is the biggest project I've ever made. I've never made anything to this scale before. And I learned a tremendous amount about working with video and photography and weaving words and imagery, and it was a very emotional story. So, I think what it did for me is it allowed me to go to connect to a story in a way that I hadn't connected to in a while, and to be really, really connected to a story that way and be able to feel it was amazing.
There were just these moments with the kids, you know, where
Yeah.
something bad happened to them, and it's just
Yeah,
devastating.
there was some really rough things.
Hard to not have someone to share that with,
Yeah.
you know, to be alone in a room with that kind of emotion it was just kind of nice to be able to pick up the phone and say, gosh, you know, it's just so sad, and it's, you know, this particular child's having a hard time, and, you know, someone got that. You didn't have to bear the burden, because you're bearing witness, really, that's your job. You know, that's ultimately, I think, what a reporter should do, is you're not there to decide anything, truthfully, but you're there to bear witness to whatever is happening, someone's suffering, someone's pain, someone's joy. You know, you bear witness. You go out into the desert, and you come back and say what you saw and what you experienced. And, you know, there's something so lonely sometimes, and sometimes it's just so nice to have someone else that you can bear witness to before you go public.
Yeah.
You know.
I was drafting off of your story. I mean, I got to work with your story.
Well, yeah, but it was interesting that it was funny, because when the reason why that meeting, to go back to return to the circular as narratives usually do, when I walked in and there were so many people there, and the thing that actually really was so scary for me but moving, it was the fact of realizing that I had been alone in a room. I thought this was my story, and that was the first time it hit me that it wasn't my story anymore. It was their story too. They had their own, you know, like the videographers, they had this, in the photographer, wow, they got very emotionally invested in Dylan Papier, the little boy that looks out at you, you know. They had their own relationships, you know, and it's so cute. Like, Dylan thought that the photographer and I lived together. He would always say, where, you know, because he had this whole, you know, emotional connection with us, and, you know, us, and it was always, so Amy, where's Evan? You know, well, gosh, I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm in Boston, he's in New York. Like, you know, they each connected in their own way to the material, to the people. You know, Sarah had her own, you know, and each of them, it's like when you read a story, you know, the saying that a story reads you. You know, you don't read a story reads you. Well, it kind of was like that. The story was reading everybody in a different way, depending on their life experiences, who they were, if they had any, you know, maybe if they had kids or they weren't, or they had little siblings, or they had encountered disease in their own lives, or whatever, they brought themselves to the table. And that was, all of a sudden I realized, wow, it's like I'm not going to have this kind of control, because they're going to be interacting with the story in their own terms, not my terms necessarily.
How did you explain to the children what you were doing?
The kids in the story?
Mm.
A lot of times I let the parent, every time I let the parents take the lead. Many of them introduced me as their friend. You know, this is our friend Amy, and you know, she's here because she's, you know, interested in what's happening. You know, the kids were pretty little. There were only some kids who were older, and you know, the older kids understood that their parents were advocates who wanted to draw public attention to the disease. But you know, always it was on the terms of the parents. And I just generally love kids anyway. I just love being with them. I think they're fun to be with, and so I would just interact with them as you might, you know, just interact with any kid. And you know, I wasn't pressing them, you know, to get inside and interview them. It was more like enjoying their company and seeing them interact with their families.
And for you, did this pose any special issues having to work with, in terms of releases or?
No, I did. That didn't fall to me. That fell to the photographers and the photo editor. I mean, the video folks, and that was outside my scope.
Yeah.
What's the part, you know, you brought us to this image, which is
That's Dylan in the middle,
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
the little boy that we were talking
Yeah.
about. He's a great kid.
Andrew, who's one of the kids.
Oh yeah, he's a great kid too. He's nice.
What's the part of this that works best for you? What's the part here that comes closest to the perfect marriage?
I don't think I have an answer to that. I mean, I don't think I have an answer to that, Lee.
You don't have an answer to it because you like the whole thing, or because
N-
all of it was an experiment, you learned stuff and you've moved on?
No, I mean, there's different things that worked for different ways. Like, you know, being in the kitchen with Chris, this was beautiful because, you know, here she is doing the pills, and then, you know, we have this shot of the kids, and I really liked the colors here, the fact that we had these, you know, this sort of harmony. There's little things like that, you know, the umbrella turned upside down with the rain, the opening scene with them breathing. They all are different.
You spent 6 years on this, you spent 8 months or more. What's the withdrawal process at the end for you two?
It's different for me than it is for you, because Amy still follows the story. Amy's still close to the families. I had a hard time. It took you know, I had a real hard time
You have to decompress a little.
decompressing.
It's
from
very
it.
emotional.
Yeah, and I still followed the families very closely, and I'm on their Facebook page, and then I started backing off from that, and it was a relief. Yeah.
I tried not to take my work home, even though I work at home.
I was going to say that's
It's a little hard, but-
a special challenge for you because you do work at
Yeah.
home.
But I kind of like, I have an office in my house that has a door. Everyone needs, as the saying goes, right? You know, room with a door and a lock is always good. But I tried to mentally also, like, I have kids, and I tried very much when I was with my kids to only think about their crises, because you can start to say, like, you don't want to shortchange your own family's issues because they're not life-threatening issues, like, right? I mean, but to the child, it's super, super important to them, you know, that they had a fight with a friend, or they didn't get what they wanted, you know, at school, or something didn't go their way. That's really, really important to them. And you don't want to ever sort of short shrift emotionally the little problems of someone, because they're big problems to that particular person. You know, everyone's life has its own stresses. So I did try very much to, like, stay in the moment, live in the moment, and not let the sadness, you know, kind of seep into the regular life. But it's hard. There were just, I mean, you know, you never really got a break from it. I took vacation and went with my family abroad and something particular happened, with the story and the reporting, and it was, urgent. And I remember being up because there was a big time difference, 2 o'clock in the morning, on my vacation, talking to Sam. I think we ran up like $500 worth of telephone
That was when
bills.
she was airlifted, when Cassie was airlifted to the.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what but it was.
There was a medical emergency.
There was a lot of stuff going
Yeah.
on, and you can't ever. You're never on vacation from it, right? It's just it's there, because it's so, their lives are at stake all the time.
So we've been talking about the mechanics of the reporting process. We've been talking about the design process, and all of these things, this narrative, the reporting, the visuals, of course, are all driven toward one goal, which is to engage the attention, the emotions, and the intellect of a reader. And I'm just, or whatever a looker, what's the right word for this? And I'm wondering what kind of response you got, what kind of feedback did you get from readers in terms of like, what did this work or not work?
We had a lot of people read all the way through to the end.
Well, no, at least in the
Yeah.
first week, the numbers that I saw, there
Yeah.
were at least 100,000 people got to the end, so.
Yeah, we had a
That's,
lot of people read through to the end, which is amazing. We had wonderful feedback. I don't remember having any negative feedback.
No,
Yeah.
the most touching note I got was this wonderful note from one of the techie guys who his job was to actually make the arm of the robot that Chris Austin at the NIH, there's a video and there's you can see the robot. He worked on the arm of the robot. He was an engineer, and he had to make the robot's arm do the drug screening. And he read the story, and he wrote me this beautiful note about how he never ever thought about what his work was doing. He said, I'm an engineer guy, I think about how do I make that arm move in the right way and everything. And he said, and suddenly I realized that I potentially saved a life, because I made that robot arm work, and it could find the drug that they could then, maybe cure a kid. And he said, thank you so much for just making me realize that I'm not in it just because I love technology. I'm in it because I want to make the world a better place. And that was my favorite note. I mean, I got a lot of notes, but I just loved that note. It was great.
Well, let's end on that note. I want to thank you both for putting up with our questions. I want to thank you for walking us through some of these decisions that you made, and for sharing the reporting and the construction of this really quite wonderful project. And really, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.